So I think the takeaway of this entire video series is this. If the ancestry that you are writing is less coherent than a flesh warp with the Ancestry Versatile Heritage, please take another developmental pass before you publish it. Today, I am starting my mega list ranking every single ancestry for Pathfinder 2nd Edition on today's episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Happy New Year's, travelers and tourists. My name is Mark, and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller who honestly thought this was going to be a two-part video series. Yes, I am that foolish. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder. And welcome to part 2 of my New Year's special, where we're taking a look at all of the ancestry options in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, this is a 3-part, not 2-part, as I originally hoped, video series where I am breaking down my thoughts on every single versatile heritage and ancestry in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Part 1 of this series dropped yesterday, and I will have a video link up here somewhere in case you haven't seen that yet, so you can go check it out. But yesterday we looked at all of the versatile heritage options that are available in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and today we are continuing the series and starting to look at the official ancestry options in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. In this video, I'm going to be looking at every single official ancestry published by Paizo for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and though this is a little bit of a stretch, I am also going to be including the Undead PC archetypes from Book of the Dead, because even if they aren't official ancestries, I felt they were pretty close to the concept and I wanted to include them. However, I am not stopping there. I am also taking a look at every single published ancestry from the Battlezoo line. Yes, Battlezoo Dragons, Battlezoo Dungeons, every single ancestry that has been published as part of Jewel of the Indigo Isles. And as part of this series, Stephen Glicker actually sent me an exclusive sneak preview of Battlezoo Ancestries Slimes, which is being released later this month as part of their Year of the Ancestries promotion, and will be featured somewhere in this video series. And I really can't bury the lead very well on that, because if you look at the timestamps for this video, you're going to quickly realize that Slimes are in the next video. But hey, that means it's in the top half of the list, and that's pretty noteworthy. But yes, if it is an ancestry option for Pathfinder 2e, it will be covered in either today's list or tomorrow's list, and I'm going to be ranking them from the worst to the best throughout this video. Now, I'm going to be using the same grading scale that I used with the Versatile Heritages in yesterday's video. There will be 4 different categories: Mechanics Part 1, Mechanics Part 2, Lore and Story, and the Wildcard category, each worth a potential 10 points, which will be totaled together to ultimately give every ancestry a score out of 40. However, that brings me to the call to action for this video, because I want you all to dive down into the comments section and let me know what you think about the ancestries that we will be discussing. Today is the back half of the ancestries list. These are the different ancestries that have been put forward where, in general, I feel like something is missing. So I'm curious to see if you agree with my opinion, or if there's something about these ancestries that you feel I have missed. I would love to hear from you. In other words, do all of that YouTube stuff. Like, share, subscribe, check out Discord and Patreon, and as I always say, most important thing you can do, jump down to the comments section, share your thoughts. I want to know what you think. But with all of that preamble out of the way, it is time to dive into the list. Let's get started. Now, before I give you my pick for the worst Ancestry published for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, I do want to talk a little bit about the scoring system itself, because as I went through this process of researching and reviewing Ancestries, as I was looking at the rubric I created, one of the things that sort of formed in my mind that really solidified was the target score that I had for any given ancestry. I would like to see Ancestries have a rough score of 20 out of 40 at the end of any review that I give. I feel like any ancestry that hits a score of 20 out of 40, it has done its job, if you will. It may not be particularly impressive, but I would feel like it is functional and would do its job inside of the game. When I was going through this review process, there were only 3 ancestries that failed to hit the score of 20 out of 40 that I was hoping for, and all 3 of them ended up feeling like ancestries that honestly I don't even want in the game, or at the very least feel like they need some serious additional work before I would want to include them. So with that out of the way, what 3 ancestries do you think failed to even meet the mark of this is the minimum I want to see? So with all of that in mind, let's ask the question, which ancestry comes in last place on this list? And sad to say, it's one of the most recent ancestries that Paizo has published. That is the Kashrishi from the Impossible Lands. Coming in with a terrible score of 15 out of 40, the Kashrishi represent an ancestry that I really feel needed a couple of more developmental passes to help make this ancestry more coherent in terms of its mechanics and story. There are a lot of problems with the Kashrishi. This isn't even a joke. The original version of this portion of the video was over 10 minutes long, and I had to go back and re-record it. Narratively and mechanically, a lot of mistakes are made here. Narratively speaking, Kashrishi are badly written idealists who, and I quote, almost never become adventurers. Listen, if you are writing an ancestry option for a TTRPG, that phrase basically says, don't use this ancestry. We're publishing a thing, but we don't want you to use it. That is bad in terms of game design. Please don't do this. Narratively, I know what the authors of the Kashrishi were going for. They were trying to design an idealist society for the Kashrishi. And if you want a good example of how to write idealist well, I would say take a look at the Shoony ancestry for Pathfinder 2e. They hit very similar beats, but they do a much better job. Overall, the Kashrishi don't feel idealist, they feel foolish. Like, they invite pirates and merchants into town at the same time and expect everyone to get along. Hello, Kashrishi. The Skittermanders from Starfinder called. They wanted to tell you you just won the most oblivious ancestry award ever. From there, you have numerous mechanical design issues that really make the Kashrishi a poor sell for me. For a group of rhino people, it boggles my mind that only 1 of 5 heritages for this ancestry actually has a horn attack. When you see rhino people, you think, stab people with my face. Why is this such a limited option? Instead, every Kashrishi comes with an ability called Emotion Sense, which is an imprecise sense that automatically detects the emotions of any creature within 15 feet. There are a lot of mechanical issues here, but let me just say, this doesn't feel like a first level option. This feels like something that should have come about at 5th or probably more likely 9th character level instead. And the Kashrishi have consistently terrible heritage design. Like, the nascent Kashrishi is a heritage that the only thing it does is give you an additional first level ancestry feat, and you think that's bad until you look over at the Trogloshi heritage for the Kashrishi, and what the Trogloshi does is give you the Crystal Luminescence feat, which is a first level ancestry feat that any Kashrishi can take, meaning that the Trogloshi heritage is just a worse version of the nascent heritage for the Kashrishi. And the design here is pretty consistently bad. The last mechanical issue I have with the Kashrishi is the way they approach ability boosts. Most Ancestries in Pathfinder 2e have 2 defined ability boosts, 1 free ability boost, and a defined ability flaw. And I'm just going to say up front here, because this is going to apply throughout this list, I like having ability flaws on most of the Ancestries. You really have to sell an Ancestry well for me not to want an ability flaw as part of the design. Not having ability flaws just feels too copycat of D&D 5e for me. I like a mix of boosts and flaws. Well, the Kashrishi do not have that mix. They have a defined boost to Constitution and a free boost. This doesn't make sense to me. They are designed as naturally psychic and empathetic, and yet they don't have wisdom or charisma as a defined boost. That's strange. And they are described as clumsy and terrible at hiding, which straight up sounds like a dexterity flaw to me. A lot of Pathfinder Ancestries that do this 1 defined boost, 1 free boost, no flaw, end up just doing +2 con and a free boost, and that ends up feeling like the generic option. They slapped a very generic option on the Kashrishi that does not fit with the Ancestry description at all. I guess rhinos are tough, but it doesn't mesh with any of the other writing. So, it just annoys me. I will say this for the Kashrishi, there is some potential here, and I do think this heritage could be saved. They've got a lot of interesting adaptive ancestry feats, and that could be a lot of fun. But overall, bad writing, bad mechanics. The Kashrishi come away at number 50 on this list. Next up, at number 49, we have an ancestry that I wanted to like, but ultimately, I just don't. And that is the Shisk from Mwange Expanse. And honestly, the Shisk they feel like someone had a really cool aesthetic that they were going for, but didn't figure out how to execute that aesthetic well, and ultimately this ancestry just falls flat for me. Your aesthetic is this secretive group of people who are covered in these natural quills and who live to ferret out secret information. And let's be honest, quill-covered spy sounds like a pretty cool character concept. I see what the people were going for when they made the Shisk, but it just falls apart for me when you actually examine the ancestry. First off, the Shisk have secret origins, which pops up just a little too often for my taste. Yes, I understand the Shisk might not share their origins with outsiders, that's fine, but there is no reason that you can't give a player or a game master some information that they can use in their stories. On top of that, there are a couple of things in the description of the Shisk that really bother me. One is, there are some places where the Shisk are openly described as a primitive group of people, and that just feels weird for any ancestry that lives to ferret out information, let's just be honest there. But even worse, it actually says that the Shisk, when they collect information, don't write things down. What? Just... This was bad. This was a bad writing mistake, and it throws off the entire ancestry for me. Like, later in the Shisk description, it says they make really good wizards, but they don't write things down. That's a nice blank spellbook you got there. This is bad writing. The authors were trying to go for these cool quill-covered spies that live in harmony with nature and can vanish into the environment at a moment's notice. I know what they were going for, but the actual writing execution here is just not good. Another thing that kind of bothers me is the little bit of information they do give us describes the Shisk as being descended from avian creatures or bird folk of some kind, and yet when you look at the Shisk ancestry feats, the terrain that they are best suited for is underground. Underground bird folk. This is not well thought out. There is a lot of potential here, and I think with a little bit of development, with a little bit of extra work, the Shisk could be made into something interesting. A lot of the quill fighting feats are fun, just being honest. And one of the things I really like about the Shisk, this is a small detail that is easy to overlook, the Shisk can potentially access any common language in the game. That's actually a pretty cool niche for this ancestry to occupy. So I think there was interesting stuff that could have been done here, but the Shisk fall way short of the bar and come in at number 49 on this list. The last ancestry that really just fell short of the bar I feel an ancestry needs to meet, and number 48 on this list, is the Conrasu from Mwange Expanse. The Conrasu are spirit beings that grow living wood around themselves to serve as a sort of armor and housing for their spiritual essence. And allow me to say this, the Conrasu as a game master option are fine. I think the Conrasu could serve as an interesting encounter to drop into an RPG session. I think as a storyteller, if you're looking for a weird quest giver to drop on your party, Conrasu are perfect. But as player characters, they fall short. This is another ancestry where their history is, and I quote, largely unknown. I don't like it when you do that. And where you really aren't given a good picture of what the Conrasu's role is in society, of what the Conrasu's role is inside of the game, other than the fact that they are lawful and are created for some kind of purpose. What that purpose is, who knows? You're just not given much. And as a player, I look at the Conrasu and think, there is nothing that connects me to this ancestry. There are not enough touchstones to make me want to play this character. Mechanically, there is some interesting stuff here. The heritages for the Conrasu are called rites and represent special moments in that character's history that they went through, and their ancestry feats are ceremonies that they perform that give them certain abilities. That's flavorful design. I think it's interesting. But when I really start breaking down the different mechanical options that the Conrasu have, they just feel like downgraded dwarves to me. Like, anything a Conrasu can do, a dwarf can do better, more flavorfully, and fit easier inside of the setting. The final thing I want to complain about on the Conrasu, and this shows up from time to time, rules as written, the Conrasu do not speak common and cannot speak common. I realize that languages is kind of a thing you can hand wave away as a storyteller, it's not that big a deal, but there's no reason for this. Having an ancestry that cannot communicate with the rest of the party is just not good game design. Conrasu come in at number 48 on my list. Now we're moving on to number 47, and let me go ahead and say here that at this point we are moving into the ancestries that pass at least what I consider the bare minimum of what an ancestry should offer in order for it to have a good place inside a role-playing game. Now, a lot of the ancestries we're going to talk about here, I still feel like they aren't particularly impressive, but I feel like we're moving into the general category where they at least feel playable to me. And coming in at number 47, this one actually hurts me a little bit. It's the Goloma from Mwange Expanse. Now, the Goloma are shy and reclusive, multi-eyed humanoids that live in the Mwange Expanse. They have this interesting mythology about how demons came to the world and started stealing eyes from all of the different ancestries around the world, and the Golomas managed to keep their eyes, but now all of the other ancestries that lost some of their eyes want to steal the Goloma's eyes instead. That's just fun writing. I like that story. But if you've been paying attention so far, you probably can see where some of my complaints on the Goloma are going to come in. You have a shy and reclusive ancestry that is afraid of every single two-eyed ancestry around them. As written, the Goloma probably would never leave home. And if you're playing a Goloma who does leave home, you're playing a Goloma so heavily against type, it almost feels like you don't need to play a Goloma. And that's really sad to me because the artwork on these things is amazing. Goloma art is some of my favorite art that Paizo has put out, and I want to see more of these things. Also, they have a lot of fun ancestry options related to perception, like they can get all-around vision because they have eyes all around their head. The Goloma are a pretty cool concept. They just feel like they're written in a way that ultimately makes them unplayable because of their story. Paizo, I'd like to see you do a little bit more work on the Goloma because some of the mechanical concepts here are fun, and with a little narrative push, I think the Goloma could fit a lot better inside of the game. Number 47, the Goloma. Coming in at number 46, I have the Gnolls, also known as the Kholo, which are hyena folk that can be found in Mwange Expanse. Now, the Gnolls make for interesting pack-oriented style characters. They fit really well for hunter archetype characters, and some of the aesthetics of the Gnolls can be pretty interesting, and the Ant Gnoll artwork is absolutely adorable. I love that thing. Overall, I think there is some potential with the Gnolls, but again, we have a little bit of an execution error that causes them to fall a little short for me. And honestly, the big issue here is the options for Gnolls, at least as they are currently presented, are Mwange Expanse only. Gnolls, as an ancestry, actually exist all over Golarion. You can find them in many different regions, but the Gnolls that are discussed mechanically inside the game are very much tied to only one region of the game, the Mwange Expanse. Don't get me wrong, I love the Mwange Expanse, it's one of my favorite parts of the setting, but I feel shortchanged that I only got one version of Gnoll culture that I could examine and potentially use. In fact, a lot of the writing on Gnolls that you can find from 1st edition Pathfinder deals with Gnolls from areas outside of the Mwange Expanse, so when I was researching this video, I wound up in this weird position where the mechanics described one group and the lore described a completely separate group, and that didn't feel good to me. I think the problem for Paizo here is Gnolls typically are a villainous group in a fantasy RPG. They are typically bad guys, and a lot of the Gnolls, a lot of the lore you can find, represent areas where they are very much going to be villains that a party is going to face, not characters that a party might include. And I can see why that's an issue. I think what Paizo tried to do is they tried to isolate one group of Gnolls and soften the edges a little bit to make them more palatable as player characters. But in trying to remove that villainous edge, I feel like they took too much from the Gnolls and made them a little less interesting than they could have been. There are villainous ancestries that Paizo has done a pretty good job of turning into potential player characters. We're going to talk about the Hobgoblins later, and you'll see what I mean when we get there. I would like to see the Gnolls get the Hobgoblin treatment where they maintain a little bit of that villainous edge, but have more of a reason to work with the typical adventuring party. I think that would make them a lot better. Right now, Gnolls sit at number 46 on my list. And now we come to number 45 on my list, where I'm going to accomplish a couple of different things all at once. First, I'm going to complete the thorough trouncing I'm giving all of the Ancestries in Mwange Expanse, apparently with this video. And second, I'm going to annoy my wife by putting one of her favorite Ancestries way too low on the list. But at number 45, I have to talk about the Anadi. These are spider folk. Basically, magical giant spiders that have the ability to transform into a more humanoid shape and can walk around and interact with people. Now, anyone who knows me knows that I am not the biggest fan of spiders, and anyone who knows my wife knows that she loves spiders. I'm sure you can imagine how much fun she has tormenting me. As much as I am naturally averse to spiders, I will say I think the Anadi are fun and interesting in Pathfinder 2e. They're very artistic, and the artwork is annoyingly cute. I should not simultaneously like the artwork and want to burn it with fire. That's a very weird emotional mix for me, Paizo. But I enjoy their connection to places like Nantambu, and their connection to characters like the deity Grandmother Spider. There's a lot of interesting stuff here with the Anadi. Ultimately, what holds the Anadi back is mechanically they just don't quite offer enough to really make me want to play one in a game. First off, their shape changing is a little bit wonky, and I feel like different Anadi forms end up not being useful a little too often. That just kind of bothers me. And then one of the things that the Anadi do that really bugs me is the Anadi do not have any 17th level Ancestry feats. Now in Pathfinder 2e, you get Ancestry feats all the way up to 17th level, so if that's how far Ancestry feat options go, then I feel like any given Ancestry should have options up until that point. So anytime an Ancestry doesn't have 17th level options, it just really bothers me, and the Anadi are one of those Ancestries that miss that mark. Also, the Anadi are one of the Ancestries that come with a Constitution flaw in terms of their ability scores, and a con flaw in Pathfinder 2e hurts. I'm not saying I'll never play an Ancestry with a con flaw, but in this game, whew, that's a big ask for me. And ultimately, I'm not sure if the Anadi offer me enough to make me want to overlook that. Still, they are spider folk that I'm at least willing to entertain the possibility of, so they can't be all that bad. Number 45 on this list is the Anadi. Next up, we have number 44 on this list, which are the Fetchling. The Fetchlings, also known as the Kayal, are an ancestry that are from the Shadow Plane. They started out as survivors from the lost continent of Aslant, who were brought to the Shadow Plane by an entity known as the Widow. And over the long centuries of inhabiting the Shadow Plane, their bodies and personalities have been changed to match the environment they now call home. And really the thing that holds the Fetchlings back for me is they kind of feel like an aesthetic more than an ancestry. Pale skin, gray hair, dark clothes, lots of shadow feats, and basically no lore since the Widow brought them to the Shadow Plane. That's kind of all you get here. In a way, the Fetchlings actually feel more like a versatile heritage than they do an actual ancestry. In fact, one of their heritage options is the Wisp Fetchling, which changes their size from medium to small, kind of implying that some of the Fetchlings started out as halflings? They just don't feel fully developed to me, and I would really like to see Paizo do another pass at their lore to give them a little more impact on the game world. Now, they do have a lot of fun shadow-themed feats, and if that is the aesthetic you're going for with your character, I can see why the Fetchling would be appealing to you. But at the end of the day, there's just not much here, so they can't go any higher on my list. Number 44 is the Fetchling. At number 43, we have another recently published heritage, which is the Vanara from the Impossible Lands. The Vanara could also be described as monkey folk, and honestly, I like what the Vanara offer. I just wanted a little bit more, and I feel like this is an ancestry that needed to be fleshed out a bit more to realize its potential. Narratively speaking, the Vanara are attached to a prankster deity, and they have this divine mandate to go out into the world and perform pranks and use pranks as a way to kind of reveal truth to people. So you have this divine mandate aspect of their character, but then the ancestry is also written as kind of rebelling against that divine mandate and trying to find their own path. And there's this interesting narrative tension for the Vanaras between the mandate of the deity that created them and their desire to walk their own path. Don't get me wrong, I think there's some good storytelling there. I just wanted a little bit more. For example, there are some references to the Vanara having some sort of ancient war with the Rakshasas, and I think Rakshasas make for very cool villains. So I would have liked some more details about the Vanaras and their struggles against those particular entities. I think that could have been pretty fun. Mechanically, the Vanaras are okay, but again, I don't feel like they offer a lot. They only come with 4 heritage options, where most Ancestries come with at least 5, so they feel a little shortchanged. And they have a decent selection of Ancestry feats. A lot of them focus around the idea of pranks. So again, there's good concepts here. It just feels like there was room for more. I will say on the Vanara that there are a few places where the narrative and mechanical aspects of this ancestry feel like a bit of a stretch. Like they were trying to go for influenced by the god of pranks and started trying to turn anything into a prank even if it wasn't necessarily one. And I'm just going to say the 17th level Vanara ancestry feat, it feels like a stretch to me. I'm not sure it fits. I think there were some good concepts here, but the Vanara is an ancestry where I wanted a little bit more, so they come in at number 43 on my list. And coming in at number 42, sharing a score and many big picture similarities to the Vanara, is the Grippli. In fact, the only reason the Grippli outscored the Vanara is probably because Frog or Glenn from Chrono Trigger is one of my favorite characters, and I think that gave them the edge here. But the Grippli are frog folk. They live in small tribal villages, mostly in the Mwange Expanse, though you can find them also in Vudra and Tian Sha. Their presence is pretty limited, and you don't get much story when it comes to the Grippli. I really wish that Paizo would give us more on the frog folk, because, honestly, I think there's a story to tell here. Like the Vanara, they only have 4 heritages to choose from. Again, I would have liked to see at least 5. And one of the things that bugs me a little bit about the Grippli is a lot of their ancestry feats are very tied to whatever heritage they originally picked, meaning that the Grippli actually feel very restricted on which ancestry feats they can actually take. On top of that, the Grippli are another ancestry that do not come with any 17th level feats, and that is problematic for me as well. In fact, right now you may be wondering, what is it about the Grippli that I actually like beyond the aesthetic of frogfolk? And there are a couple of interesting lore pieces that I found for the Grippli that did bring them a little bit higher in my personal estimation. One of them is a rumor that the Grippli may not be native to Golarion, but may actually come from another planet originally, similar to another ancestry that will be somewhere on this list, and I think that's a pretty cool lore beat. Another thing I really enjoy is the concept of the Fiend Keeper role that exists in many Grippli tribes. It is a Grippli that seeks to contain and control fiends to prevent them from doing more damage to the Grippli's community. It's a very unique kind of role, and I would love to see some options for playing a Grippli Fiend Keeper. I think it could make for a very cool character. I want to see more on this. Overall, I think the Grippli, like the Vanara, have a lot of potential. I just don't think Paizo has gotten them there yet. I'd love to see more, but for now, the answer to life, the universe, and everything is the Grippli. Now it's time for number 41 on our list, and an ancestry that I would like to once again advocate on this channel. Paizo, please give us a full official take on this ancestry. Number 41 is the Shoony. Now the Shoony are dog folk that exist on the Isle of Kortos outside of the city of Absalom. Their lore says that they were created by Eridan shortly after he raised up the Isle of Kortos to serve as companions for him. The Shoony are loyal, optimistic, focused on redemption, and strongly believe that peace is always a worthy goal. By the way, if you want to know how to write Idealist, the Shoony, that's how you write Idealist. They do it well. Truthfully, the Shoony in many ways reflect how you can positively portray certain tropes that hinder some of the other ancestries in Pathfinder 2e. For example, the Shoony very rarely become adventurers. That's one of the ways that they are described, but alongside the note that they very rarely become adventurers, it also notes that the Shoony are very protective and are likely to take up arms if they feel they need to protect their community or somebody that they love. This is how you can have an ancestry full of homebodies and still get some adventurers out of them and make it feel natural. Overall, the Shoony is an ancestry that is actually off to a very solid start. There is a lot of stuff about the Shoony that I love. If we're going to have fully developed catfolk, I want fully developed dogfolk in my setting. It just needs to happen. The obvious issue with the Shoony is this: they have only ever been published through an adventure path, and that publication of the Shoony ultimately feels very shallow. They don't have 17th level feats, their storyline feels very short and to the point. For an ancestry that was created by the god Eredin, they seem remarkably unaffected by Eredin's death. What's up with that? The Shoony is an ancestry that is off to a good start in terms of Paizo's design, but I really want Paizo to pick them up in a future book and give them a proper and full development, because I think the Shoony could be a top-notch ancestry with just a little more work. At number 40, we actually have one of my favorite ancestries from the game Starfinder, and that is the Ratfolk or the Ysoki. This is a fairly common fantasy and sci-fi style ancestry, and a lot of what you would expect with a Ratfolk ancestry you're going to get with Paizo's take on this. I don't think there's going to be a lot of surprises here, but I still enjoy the Ratfolk, and I do think that they are a fun inclusion. In fact, the Ratfolk actually have their own underground nation under the continent of Tian Sha in the Golarian setting, but we just haven't been to Tian Sha yet in Pathfinder 2e. So the Ratfolk kind of feel like an ancestry that's just waiting for the right book to come out before they really get the push that they deserve. I honestly think in the future the Ratfolk could move up on this list pretty easily. There are, however, a few things that hold the Ratfolk back. First, several of the Ratfolk heritages come with a mixture of positives and negatives, and generally speaking, I actually enjoy mixing in some interesting flaws for a character to have to deal with. Flaws are not necessarily a bad thing, but with the Ysoki, I kind of feel like the flaws tip over the edge of interesting into the point of actually weighing down the character. I feel like there are some options for the Ratfolk that are just not worth taking, and that does hold this ancestry back for me. They do have some fun and interesting ancestry feats. Cheek pouches is a classic ability for the Ratfolk, and they get a lot of fun, like swarm fighting style ancestry feats. I think that stuff is pretty cool, but they only have one 17th level ancestry feat, and it allows them to cast the Enlarge spell, but they can only cast the Enlarge spell on themselves or other Ysoki, which means that if there are no other Ratfolk in your group, that it ends up being a very limited ability. Finally, and I kind of feel bad saying this, but it just stood out to me, the artwork for the Ratfolk is too consistently cosmopolitan in Pathfinder 2e. Like, I understand why you would want to have some cosmopolitan artwork for Ratfolk, but it's so common that it's actually a little off-putting for me, and I would like to see some grittier Ratfolk artwork, similar to some of the cool stuff that they've done in Starfinder. The artwork in 2e throws me off. Still, long story short, the Ratfolk to me feels like an ancestry where Paizo is waiting for the right book, the right opportunity, to really dive into what this ancestry has to offer. So I don't think that the Ysoki are going to stay at number 40 on this list forever. That's just the spot that they hold for right now. Coming in at number 39 on this list, let's talk about a Battlezoo ancestry, the Kragak ancestry from Jewel of the Indigo Isles. Now, the Kragak industry, I hope I'm saying that correctly, are a sort of earth elemental themed ancestry, though their take on the earth element involves concepts such as ash, boulder, sand, and salt, and that's a little bit of a unique twist. And if you're familiar with the world of Battlezoo, the Kragak are actually very closely tied to the concept of the Eld, or the forthcoming Eldamon that's going to be part of the Battlezoo line. the Kragak actually mix their particular take on the earth element with one of these secondary elements from the Eldamon line to come up with some unique elemental combinations. And if you're familiar with the Eldamon series, you know that some of the Eldamon elements are a little more creative, such as time and music, so you can get some interesting combinations here. The big issue with the Kragak in terms of Pathfinder 2nd Edition is they were written for a non-Golarian setting, and they use a lot of that non-Golarian setting elements very heavily in terms of how the ancestry is presented. Which means, if you want to play a Kragak in Pathfinder 2e in Golarian, you have to have a storyteller who is willing to use or modify the Eld and the Eldamon and the Kragak's view of elemental magic with the Golarian setting. It's doable, but it's also a lot of work, and I could see a lot of storytellers going, I don't know if I want to do that. If you have a storyteller who's not willing to dive in and use those elements, you end up with a pretty generic take on an earth elemental themed ancestry, and the Kragak don't stand out, and so that kind of holds the ancestry back here. Now, one of the things I enjoy is the concept of the speech name versus the name mark that the Kragaks go for. A speech name is their spoken name, and they keep it very simple. It's short, it's sweet, it's to the point, it does its job. But the name mark is this glorious earth rune that is carved on them that can become more and more elaborate, reflecting their accomplishments, their titles, their dreams, and their goals. And I love the picture of this earth-aspected creature with these long, elaborate names chiseled into their body. I think that's pretty fun. And they also have a lot of ancestry feats that play off of this. So I do think the Kragak are creative. I just don't know if they fit inside of Golarian super well, so that places them lower on the list at number 39. Coming in at number 38, we have another ancestry from Lost Omen's Impossible Lands with the Vishkanya. Now, the Vishkanya are Ophidian humanoids, basically meaning serpent-like humanoids. From a distance, they appear to be human, but the closer you get, the more you might notice their scaly skin, forked tongue, and eyes with vertical pupils. The Vishkanya are a venomous group of people, and all of them have the ability to poison you with their bite. In terms of lore, we don't get a lot for the Vishkanya. We do know that for some mysterious reason, they are at odds with the Naga, and to a lesser extent the Naga-ji. And they are described as surviving in small communities that are often closely bonded together. And one of the big running themes with the Vishkanya, at least in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, is that they are a misunderstood group of people. And here I have a little bit of problem because mechanically with the Vishkanya, Paizo pretty much goes all in on venom abilities. Like, there's a few other options here and there, but if you are playing a Vishkanya, you are playing a venomous character. Poison is going to be your thing. And I feel like if they wanted to portray the Vishkanya as a misunderstood group of people, they needed to give them a little more diversity beyond just, here's a group of people who can poison you with their bites. Like, in terms of lore, the two places we see them outside of Vudra are Daggermark, where they are associated with the Daggermark Poisoners Guild, and with the Red Mantis Assassins. They're misunderstood? What? I do think the Vishkanya could be a lot better, and I do think as time goes forward, Paizo could develop their story in some interesting ways. Right now, the mechanics isn't lining up, and that does hold them back a little bit. The Vishkanya came out in the same book as the Nagaji, and if you compare them side by side, they are very similar, but the Nagaji feels so much more well-developed that the Vishkanya pale in comparison. And by being so all-in on the concept of venom, it does hold them back a bit, causing them to land at number 38 on this list. At number 37 on my list, we actually have an ancestry option that if we were going by sheer popularity at my gaming table, could have probably been top 10, and it is our first option that is coming from the Book of the Dead. That is the Skeleton Ancestry. Yes, that's right, you can play as a skeleton. Years ago, there was a beloved NPC in one of my games that was a skeleton bard. The party loved him, he is referenced constantly by my table, and when we saw that Pathfinder 2e released official rules for playing a skeleton, my group was ecstatic because it was just this fun throwback to one of our favorite old gaming stories, and if I'm being honest, I absolutely love it. But when I look at the Skeleton Ancestry seriously, there are things you have to take into account, one of the big things being you're an undead player character. Undead PCs can work, especially in certain settings. Places like Geb or the Eye of Dread, undead PCs can fit in perfectly well and can flow very neatly in that setting, but in a lot of places around Golarion, an undead PC is going to be a liability, not a benefit. And that makes any undead PC something of a niche character, which is ultimately going to hold an undead PC back in terms of where they might fall in a given ranking. The heritages here are nice, but nothing particularly exciting. I do enjoy a lot of these skeleton ancestry feats that allow them to manipulate their bones in different and entertaining ways. I think the skeleton is a lot of fun. It's just a niche concept, and because it's a niche concept, I couldn't put it much higher than number 37 on my list. And speaking of undead PCs, up next I want to talk about the Vampire Archetype, also from Book of the Dead, which comes in at number 36. Yes, that's right. Paizo has given us a number of archetypes that allow you to play classical examples of undead creatures inside of Pathfinder 2e. Now, there is a key distinction that is a little bit different from the rest of this list, which is Vampire is an archetype, not an ancestry. And I do realize that distinction muddies the water a little bit on this list, but in this case, because the Vampire Archetype allows you to play a vampire, and that feels very similar to Ancestry, I'm including these archetypes here. I think they are worth discussing. Because Vampire is an archetype, it's not going to use your Ancestry feats, and instead it's going to eat into your class feats. That is something that holds these different undead PC archetypes back a little bit for me. You have all of the issues of being an undead PC, combined with you're using up some of your class feats to do this. It is a little bit problematic, but at the end of the day, the result is you have a balanced and accessible way of playing a character that has been turned into a vampire, and unlike a skeleton, a vampire can fit in a lot more settings a lot easier, meaning that this is an undead PC that is much less of a liability in terms of where a campaign can take place. Now, I will say, in terms of narrative role inside of Golarion, that the vampire is a weird copy and paste of everything I said about the Vampire Versatile Heritage in yesterday's video, so I guess rewatch that if you need to see it all. There are a few interesting different lines of vampires and a few different ways you can approach a vampire PC if that's what you want to do. There is one thing that is a little weird about the Vampire Archetype feats. The Vampire Archetype has access to a feat called Daywalker, which allows your vampire to operate in sunlight without being destroyed. The Vampire also has a feat called Daywalker that is much higher level and not nearly as good. Paizo, why did you do this? Like, I can understand the gameplay purpose here, but it just seems strange that a regular vampire has an easier time adjusting to sunlight than the Vampire Versatile Heritage does. That is a weird quirk of the game rules. Still, a balanced and accessible way to play a vampire is a good thing. So, number 36 on this list is the Vampire Archetype from Book of the Dead. Coming in at number 35, we have a rare ancestry called the Android, which is a very region-locked ancestry in Pathfinder 2e. Androids are associated with Numeria, and pretty much that's it. They might make it to a neighboring country occasionally, But for the most part, if you're going to play an android, you need to be in or around the region of Numeria, or your character's not going to fit. Androids are, in keeping with science fiction, a humanoid-looking robot, though in Pathfinder, and notably also in Starfinder, androids are unique in that they are a robotic creature that has a soul. In one way or another, a soul has latched on to the body of the android, and you have a distinct living creature that will move on to the afterlife one day. Now, androids are interesting because the body actually processes souls over and over again, so the android's body will gain a soul, live a life, and then when that soul passes on, a new soul will enter the android's body, meaning you can have the same physical character, but with very different personalities because they are in fact a separate person. The lore implications of all of this are a lot of fun, and androids I think could lead to some interesting storytelling. The big issue with the android really from a player character perspective is, number one, is your storyteller okay with science fiction style creatures? Number two, do they want to use Numeria or be close enough to Numeria that it is reasonable for your character to show up? And number three, how much fun are you going to have with the absurd amount of techno-jargon themed options that the android gives you? Do you love having a bunch of ancestry feats that use the word nanites or subroutines? Then you'll probably have fun. If the techno-jargon wears out on you after a bit, this might not be the right pick for you. Down the road, when Paizo actually visits Numeria in terms of a setting book, I think the androids will get a lot more content, maybe including some 17th level feats. And I think down the road the android will be a much more interesting option, but it's still in a pretty good place now, and it lands at number 35 on my list. At 34, we're going to talk about another Undead PC option from Book of the Dead, and that is the Ghoul Archetype. Now, everything I said about the skeleton and the vampire still applies here. It's an Undead PC that limits where you can set your character and have them fit reasonably well. It is an archetype, so taking the Ghoul Archetype is going to eat up some of your class feats. But with those things in mind, I just really like the Ghoul Archetype. It is fun and violent in a dangerous way. It mixes really, really well with martial classes. Like, if you've got an edgier game that's tending more towards like the Shades of Grey or even into an evil campaign, I think the Ghoul Archetype could be a lot of fun, and a lot of the hunger themes that go into the Ghoul's abilities. It's certainly not for everyone, but if you've got the right campaign, I think a Ghoul Archetype PC could be a ton of fun, and because of the mechanical execution of the Ghoul Archetype, it really brought it higher on this list than I originally thought it would be. So coming in at number 34 is the Ghoul. Next up at number 33, we may have what is the most important ancestry on this list from a game design perspective. Because I'm going to talk about the ancestry that I originally thought would be in last place. Yeah, seriously. When I first came up with the idea for this video, I thought my number 33 pick, the Hobgoblin, would be the lowest ranked ancestry in this entire game, because when the Hobgoblin originally released for Pathfinder 2e, there were just several things about the Hobgoblin as a character choice that I didn't like. When the Hobgoblins originally showed up, one of their big problems was a mechanical assumption with their ancestry feats and different choices that, while they were team players, the only team they would play with was other Hobgoblins. Here's this cool ability that you can only use if another Hobgoblin is present. That was bad game design, because it really made you say, if there are no other Hobgoblins in my group, there's no reason to pick this. Since then, Paizo has done a good job of giving Hobgoblins other mechanical options and choices to broaden what they are capable of doing and make it where the Hobgoblin can actually work with other ancestries and other allies. And as a result, the Hobgoblin is actually in a much better place than I originally thought when I started this list. The Hobgoblin is a very defensive and survival-oriented ancestry that has a lot of fun teamwork options. Some of those teamwork options are a little cruel, but you end up with an ancestry that has that villainous edge that I talked about with the Gnolls earlier. They have that villainous edge, but you can see why they might work with an adventuring party, why they might choose to ally with other groups, and I think that actually makes the Hobgoblins more interesting than they originally appeared. If you dive into the Hobgoblin Nation of Oprok and some of the stuff that the Hobgoblins are doing in Tianjia, if you research some of the Hobgoblins' history, particularly what the reference to the word Cantorian means, there is some pretty good lore around the Hobgoblins, and you actually get a very complex look at what is traditionally considered to be a villainous ancestry, and the overall execution of the Hobgoblin is really good. But I think one of the most important things to note here is the original publication of Hobgoblins in Pathfinder 2e wasn't that good. But Paizo came through and expanded, they worked, they built upon the base they had, and the final result is an ancestry that I actually find much more interesting. And so the Hobgoblins are not at the bottom of the list, they're number 33, and I think that's pretty noteworthy. Now, I will admit, number 32 on the list, I feel a lot of people are probably going to disagree with, and this may be just a personal preference issue myself, but at number 32, I have the Kitsune, which are an ancestry of shape-changing foxfolk. They have a hybrid form that is a humanoid fox of some kind, and then they have an alternate form. They can either have a pure fox form, or what's referred to as a tailless form, where they basically look like a human or other common ancestry that lives in their general area. I've been aware of Kitsune as an ancestry concept for a long time in gaming, and just personally, Kitsune has always been there for me. I know a lot of people really love the Kitsune and really love the lore and aesthetic of the Kitsune. Myself, I've never had a strong reaction, and they've always been kind of average to me, and Pathfinder 2e has not really done anything to change that average outlook that I have. I see the appeal of shape-changing foxfolk. I can understand why people would enjoy that. It's just not something that speaks to me very much. Still, if you're looking for a very magic-oriented ancestry, the Kitsune can be a very solid choice. They have a lot of fun and interesting options, and the ability to jump back and forth between a couple of different forms depending on what you want to do, I do think that is very appealing. Narratively speaking, I enjoy Pathfinder's take on the Kitsune as having competing personalities. They've got two physical forms, but they've also got kind of two personalities that struggle for control. I think that could lead to some fun role-playing. And I also enjoy the fact that there's sort of this Kitsune social game. When one Kitsune meets another, they play this game where they try to trick the other Kitsune into revealing the truth about what they are without just outright spoiling it for the people around them. And that could make for some fun social encounters and role-playing, so that's also pretty good. As Kitsune are strongly tied to Tianjia, I do think when Paizo starts exploring that region in 2e, I think we will see more Kitsune content come out, and I think that the ancestry will get more appealing. But for me personally, it's never been something that strongly appealed to me, and Paizo hasn't done anything special to change that, meaning that ultimately, Kitsune land at number 32 on my list. Coming in at number 31, we have the Chochori or Chochori. I'm not sure what the correct pronunciation is. This is a group of coral folk from the Battlezoo, Jewel of the Indigo Isles. I'm going for Chochori as the correct pronunciation. If I got that wrong, I do apologize. But much like real-life coral, their bodies are actually composed of a number of small individual creatures that have combined together to create one unique Chochori that interacts with the world at large. So essentially you have living coral people that Battlezoo notes often serve as particularly adept undersea librarians. Chochori are amphibious and have the hydration flaw, similar to some of the other amphibious ancestries that we will encounter on this list. And they are yet another ancestry that has the very generic ability boost options of +2 con and a free boost with no flaw. Again, every time I see that just feels too generic to me. But one of the things I enjoy about the Chochori is that in addition to the 5 heritages that Battlezoo provides for the Chochori, they also have 8 different elemental affinities that they get to choose during character creation that will interact with their different Chochori ancestry feats. And the Chochori take on elements pulls from the Battlezoo concepts of the Eld and the Eldamon, so that means that some of the Chochori elements are going to be things like plant and ice, in addition to the more typical elements that you and I might think of. Now, like the Kragak that we discussed earlier, the big issue here is because they pull so much from Battlezoo's unique setting, it's a little hard to adapt them to Golarion unless you have a storyteller who is willing to take the concepts of the Eld and the Eldamon and their associated elements and work them into Golarion in one way or another. If you have a game master that's willing to do that, the Chochori could fit pretty easily, but if you don't have a GM that wants to do it, I feel like this ancestry is going to fall flat. That does harm them a little bit. However, if you want to play an aquatic ancestry, I do think the Chochori are a lot of fun, and Battlezoo has some excellent ancestry feat design. The Chochori is a good example of this. Seriously, go check out the Jewel of the Indigo Isle character creation guide. One of their 17th level feats, they just turn into this line of poison that sprays across the battlefield and deals an absurd amount of poison damage to their enemies. It's really sweet, I love it. The feat design on the Chochori is amazing, and if you have a GM who's willing to work with you, you might want to check out number 31 on my list, the Chochori. Moving up to number 30 on my list, I want to talk about another robotic ancestry called the Automatons. However, unlike the androids and their associations with sci-fi elements that have crashed into Numeria, the Automatons are actually associated with Golarion. Automatons were created by the ancient Jiska Imperium. Sometime in the distant past, as the Jiska Imperium stood on the brink of destruction, a group of powerful mages figured out a way to transfer a person's consciousness to a specially designed robotic body, creating what is now known as the Automatons. After the fall of the Jiska Imperium, the knowledge of how to create the Automatons were lost, and over time, the minds that were inside of the Automatons began to lose some of their memories and some of their orientation to reality because, honestly, their minds weren't set up to live inside such a body. Now, you have these solitary individuals who maintain much of their personality but have lost many of their memories and are maneuvering through a world where they have little frame of reference because they were never created to inhabit it. Automatons, like androids, do have souls, but no real way to replace themselves. Now, interesting narrative note, Paizo has teased that the method for creating automatons may be rediscovered here in the near future. That feels like an adventure path waiting to be written. So I do think automatons could be seeing a narrative push sometime in the future. Mechanically speaking, automatons are a little bit of a give and take for me. On one hand, automatons only have 4 heritages, and I don't find them particularly inspiring. They correspond to the particular role that the automaton was designed to fill. However, what I do enjoy are the automaton ancestry feats, because the automaton ancestry feats come with an optional trait called enhancement. Essentially, your automaton can upgrade certain parts of their body or certain abilities that they have. Oh, does your automaton have some kind of interesting arm weapon? Well, we've added a few parts to make it all that more devastating. The concept of taking an ancestry feat and then enhancing it is pretty cool. It's unique. I like this effect. Also, one of my favorite 17th level ancestry feats in the entire game is the automaton's core cannon, where they just turn into a giant cannon and start blasting people. That is fun. The only thing that feels a little off for me with automatons is, as they are all supposedly these very ancient creatures, it feels kind of weird that you can play one at level 1. You know what I mean? Still, at number 30 on my list, the Automaton. Next up, let's talk about number 29, which is the zombie archetype from Book of the Dead. And in this particular case, it allows you to play a zombie that has managed to maintain some of its intellect, some of its independence, and it allows the zombie to operate on its own free will. In particular, the zombie archetype turns you into what's known as a husk zombie, distinguishing you a little bit from some of the more common zombies, and allowing a narrative reason for you to maintain some of your independence. It is noted that husk zombies often have some alchemical element to their creation, meaning that your character probably has someone that turned you into a husk zombie, which does present a possible story hook. Now, like any other undead archetype, the issues we've discussed before do apply here. You're an undead PC, that does influence how playable you are in certain settings, and on top of that, the zombie archetype is an archetype, so your abilities are going to be sacrificing some of your class feats rather than using your ancestry feats. That is a little bit of a negative as well. Additionally, the zombie archetype forces you to deal with the deterioration of your body, meaning the zombie archetype debuffs you. And if you are interested in playing the zombie archetype, you need to prepare for this. You will have to deal with some debuffs because your body is literally falling apart. All that being said, I'm actually surprised by how fun the zombie archetype looks. It's intended to be tough and tanky and be able to take some damage. You get some good combat options, but one of my favorite things about the zombie archetype is the idea that just because your body is falling apart doesn't mean it stopped functioning. There is literally a zombie archetype feat called Out of Hand, where you pop off your hand or your arm and set it loose on the ground, and it crawls around and does stuff for you. That is so much fun! The zombie archetype can make you good at grappling. It can allow you to fight from unusual positions like prone. There are a lot of fun nuances to the zombie archetype. This is one of those undead PC archetypes I originally overlooked, but when I went back and seriously started reading, I was impressed at the fun little layers that Paizo baked into this archetype, and zombie actually shuffled its way higher on this list than I thought it would. Number 29, zombies. Of course, since we've dealt with the undead body, we might as well deal with the undead spirit as well. Moving on to number 28 on this list is the ghost archetype, also from Book of the Dead. And this archetype does exactly what you think it does. It allows you to play the ghost of a character that is passed on. When your character becomes a ghost, you must select some form of unfinished business that serves as the driver for why your spirit remains. Now, it's worth saying, the unfinished business concept really provides a story driver for the ghost archetype that some of the other undead PCs are missing. A lot of undead PCs feel like if you're in the right region, you can drop this in, it'll be fun, but the concept of a ghost PC feels like something you can use in a lot of different places because the idea of a spirit returning to finish some important task is a little more setting neutral and I think a little more applicable to a lot of different campaigns. That makes the ghost archetype something that I think a lot of players could use and a lot of game masters might be open to. Now again, with the ghost archetype, you do have to note it's an undead PC. That does influence where you can play it. It is an archetype, so you're using class feats, not ancestry feats. That does detract a little bit here. But being able to access things like the frightful moan of a ghost or at higher levels passing through walls and flying like a ghost, all of these abilities are a ton of fun, and I certainly think worth considering for a character who has some business to finish after they breathe their last breath. Now, I will say this, a lot of commentary on the ghost archetype has mentioned that rules as written, a level 2 character who takes the ghost archetype cannot open doors. So if they're in a room and someone shuts the door, they are stuck. And I'm not going to lie, that feels a little bad. The Ghost archetype is a little bit wonky mechanically. It takes a little while before it's really flowing the way you want it to flow, but overall this is something I'm glad they included, and I'm glad to put it at number 28 on my list. Coming in at number 27 is an ancestry that I was a little bit surprised lands as low as it does overall, and that is Elves. In fantasy TTRPGs, Elves are actually classically one of my favorite ancestries to play. I really enjoy Elves, and I actually enjoy the story of a lot of half-elves, so Elves are something that tend to appeal to me. I was a little bit shocked when I saw how low their ultimate score came in relative to some of the other ancestries in Pathfinder 2e. I feel like Elves have a case of they went first and Paizo wasn't sure what to do with them. Now, narratively, I do like one of the things Paizo does with the Elves, and that is Elves are no longer creatures of the wild, they're no longer fey creatures, no. Elves in Golarion are aliens. They are not originally from Golarion, they come from a completely different planet. They have both come to Golarion and left Golarion and come back via the Severian Stone, and Elves do not naturally consider Golarion to be their home. Now, there are certainly plenty of Elves that spend their entire lives on Golarion, but I think the alien spin on the Elf ancestry is a unique take, and Paizo deserves credit for being brave enough to do something like that. However, ultimately, Elves kind of feel unimpactful to the Golarion setting. They left Golarion to avoid Earthfall, and they only returned to Golarion to protect the Severian Crystal. On the face of Golarion, the elf nation of Kyonin exists in a long stalemated battle against the Demon Lord Tree Racer, and with the exception of the very reclusive, that's problematic, Mordant Spire elves, most elves don't feel like they are actually influencing events in Golarion on the scale I would like them to. Elves in other fantasy settings often feel more influential, and while Paizo's take on the elves are interesting, they ultimately feel like they're not doing as much as I want them to do. That being said, Mordant Spire elves and their war against the Algolathu, that's fun. That's something I'm glad I get to see. Glad they put that in there. Mechanically, elves do get some fun and interesting options. I love the Ancient Elf Heritage, and also several of the Elf Ancestry feats that just play off the idea that they are so long-lived that they know more languages or are trained in extra skills. A lot of that stuff is really fun. I will say that some of the high-level Elf Ancestry options just aren't as good as some of the high-level options that other Ancestries get. And again, I feel like that's a case of Elves were published early, and I don't know if Paizo quite knew what they wanted to do with them. For example, the 17th level Magic Rider feat that Elves can take, that is trash. I do not like that feat. Now, early on, Elves have a lot of good options, and I do think that you can build some fun Elf characters, but ultimately, I'm not sure if Paizo knew where they were going with this ancestry, so they landed lower on this list than I thought they would. They come in at number 27. Alright, the time has come to round out the back half of my Ancestries ranking list, and now I want to talk about number 26, the Catfolk, also known as the Amurin. Now, allow me to say, as a huge fan of the Khajiit in Skyrim, I appreciate the fact that Paizo gave the Catfolk in 2e access to an ancestry feat called Well Met Traveler. Good pop culture reference there, I love it. The Catfolk do end up being an interesting ancestry for me. A lot of their ancestry feats revolve around things like fortune and misfortune, and dealing with things like curses. I think that's a lot of fun. And the Catfolk ancestry offers some fun and interesting options if you would like to focus in on stealth and perception. Mechanically, I think the Catfolk hit the right strides inside of Pathfinder 2e, and narratively there are a few interesting things going on as well. There are references to a Catfolk city called Muraseth, as well as an ancient Catfolk empire that would have existed in and around Muraseth, and there are rumors that Muraseth guards some sort of vague threat to the world. What it is, who knows? One of the real problems with the Catfolk in Pathfinder 2e is a lot of their narrative centers around Muraseth, which is on the southern portion of the continent of Garund, meaning that, as of right now, no official books have really visited that region on Golarion. In other words, like many of the Ancestries featured so far in this list, I feel like Catfolk are well positioned as Paizo explores other regions in Golarion to see some development and some interesting additions to who they are and what they represent inside of the game. Catfolk are off to a good start, and I think that they are a very solid ancestry, but right now, most of my Catfolk characters are too much of a play on Skyrim rather than a genuine take on how Paizo wants to use them in their story. I'm looking forward to seeing what is published for the Catfolk down the road. I think Paizo has some good ideas that they're brewing, but for now, Catfolk will round out the back half of this list and take number 26. Whew! And with that, I am halfway through all of the Ancestry options in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this video series here. The last part of this series, Part 3, which will cover the Ancestries ranked to number 25 all the way up to number 1, will hopefully be coming out tomorrow, though depending on editing time, it may be delayed a day or two. But for now, I'm going to turn the conversation over to you. What are your thoughts about the Ancestries we discussed in today's video? Do you agree with my take on these Ancestries, or are there some Ancestries that you feel I haven't given a fair shake? I'm particularly curious to see if people give me some pushback on the Kashrishi, the Shisk, and the Conrasu. I know I was particularly opinionated on those three. Still, I would love to hear what you have to say. So jump down to the comments section, let me know how you would rank the Ancestries discussed in today's video, and make some predictions on the Ancestries that will appear on the top half of this list. Don't forget to do all of the other YouTube stuff. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, subscribe, check out my free Discord, check out my Patreon, do all of the stuff that helps to keep this channel afloat. This series has been a ton of work, so any support you give is deeply appreciated. But as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.